All right, how's everyone doing? We're just going to wait a few minutes for a few more of our participants to arrive. Awesome. All right, so I just like to remind everyone to please change their Zoom name to their real name so we can take attendance. Thanks. Alrighty, so let's get started. I think before we start the lecture formally, we just like to start by acknowledging everyone who was able to make it on time. But if you come in a bit late, uh, no worries. We do have recordings to on the bits that were not covered. And yeah, let me share my screen. If everyone could let me know that that my screen is being shared, that would be great. Everyone can see my screen. Awesome. Alrighty. So hello again. This is our fifth lecture. I thought I'd start just by including my email, which is for lab-related questions, as well as an email for any non-technical course-related questions. And yeah, let's continue. So today we're going to be talking about website design. This includes the design process in general, principles of web design, and finally, I'll guide everyone through a few demos that we have prepared. So sometimes the question comes like, why bother designing things? So I just like to mention that when it comes to design, first impressions do matter. And this is true in the context both of, presenting oneself to other people, like during an interview, but this carries over to websites as well. Now, the design is an essential part part of the user experience. And so when a user first visits your website, a great design is something that's going to leave a lasting impression on the user. It's going to make them more likely to, come back to your website or to purchase things on your website. These are all the things that really matter. Even like exploring your website and seeing what is being offered, especially if you're providing a service, that's something that's really important. Now, if the user experience is great, then that would give you a competitive advantage to your website. So in today's digital world, users have lots of options. So that's why that's important. Um, for example, let's consider video streaming sites. So we have YouTube, Vimeo, Dailymotion, Twitch. There's probably a few more, but I haven't heard of them. So, why haven't I heard of them? And that's because YouTube has actually captured the market. And without a doubt, their seamless design plays a pretty big role in that. Credibility is also something to consider. Now, that's especially true if you have an e-commerce section on your site. So that's like part of your site where people will have to put in their credit cards or other like banking information. A professional site conveys trustworthiness to users and it makes them both more likely to interact with your site. So that's especially true when spending money is concerned. I thought I'd also include an example of two websites that I found, one of which is pretty bad and one of which is actually great. So Links Cars, this is a car financing website. And as you can see, it's not terrible, but the designs are a bit strange, and I would definitely not put my credit card information into this. Exactly, yeah. Whereas Flex 360, this actually looks like a pretty good car financing website. And we can already see like how different the impression we get from it. Yeah. If anybody would like to share some like really good websites, feel free to share in the chat. Websites with good designs. All right, so you might be thinking like, how can I learn this power? How can I make great websites with excellent designs? And this is something we will cover very shortly, so there's no need to be worried. Yeah, Amazon's great. Amazon has a really good design, and it's also very simple to use, which makes sense because there's a lot of money involved in Amazon when it comes to buying products. So they do want to exactly, yeah, Tesla, Apple, these are all great examples. Usually it's like companies that already are quite big, and part of the reason why is like it's part of the reason why they actually got there in the first place, and they have to keep their design seamless to keep their product going. Awesome. All right, so let's start by going over the design process in general. So this is specifically in industry. So I thought we'd first talk about UI versus UX, since these are some terms that are important to the design process. So UI stands for user interface, UX stands for user experience. So these are not the same. And UX designers, they tend to take a functional approach. So their end goal is trying to make a superior user experience. So they focus on the feel of the app. Is the experience pleasant for the user? This can include stuff like user research. So trying to figure out how to categorize different users and cater to their needs. A really good example of this would be sometimes, you know, people who are in UX research, if they're trying to figure out, the types of users they have, they might have a product that is useful for many types of people in many professions. So they might have like doctors, lawyers, um, engineers, and so on. And so they'll have to try to figure out, how can we change our experience to cater to these different people. So maybe, on their first page when you enter, they might have a separate sort of stream for each of these people. So they might just put in, an information like, what are you looking for? Or what is your background, right? The user clicks that, and then it's a whole different experience of how to use their product specifically for that kind of user. And that's actually really important for user retention and trying to make the case that your product is useful for users. Yeah, is the experience pleasant? That's also pretty important, and that was something we just mentioned. And yeah, so they focus on user studies, research, and feedback. So often, in the UX design field, there are a lot of people who actually study human psychology and trying to find out, what is the best way we can make our product appeal to people and we can keep people using it. So that's, it's a huge section. It's a huge area of research as well. UI designers, so again, that stands for user interface. So UI designers will take the aesthetic approach, and their end goal is to make the application look good. So this will include stuff like transitions, interface animations, the locations of components. So, where is the search bar? Where are the buttons? Where is the text? How can we make that look, the best that we can make it look? So, whenever you visit Amazon or some of these websites people are mentioning, Lululemon, H&M, Joyful Emporium, the UI designer, well, both of them work together, but the UI designer sort of makes the transitions, the animations, puts the components down. The UX designer, you know, puts their input into that, with information from user experience studies. And these two, UI and UX, they work hand in hand together to try to figure out what's the best approach we can make for our site. Now, usually they're not always discrete. Like you will have someone who has training in both. So that's something I think I should mention. So designs are a critical part. Designers are a critical part of the process of designing a website. And so I thought I'd go over the design process in general, just to see, where do all these things fit in when it comes to designing a website or an app or any sort of tech-related product. So strategy, what is discrete? Um, feel free to ask a question feel free to ask a question like on the mic as well. Oh, I was just mentioning that designers are a very important part of designing a website. So when it comes to things like there's like a whole design process, and designers, when it comes to making any sort of product that's tech related or an application or a website, designers are part of that process. And in this slide, I'm actually going to go over that process. Yeah. Alrighty. So I'd like to start with strategy. Strategy is like the first thing that needs to be thought about. So we have market researchers, product managers, as well as many others. So these sorts of people will conduct research and they'll ideate on what product or website might be needed on the market. So this is something that we will cover in the future, but can be thought of as what gets the ball rolling. Usually this is actually probably I would say one of the more important aspects of even starting the website design. And it's more relevant when there are monetary incentives rather than just, a project, for the sake of learning. Because if there are monetary incentives, people have to do market research and they have to figure out, you know, is this product actually needed? And if it is needed, then what are we doing that's unique to make the case to actually spend a lot of money and the hours to go through every stage of this design process so we have an end product that returns revenue. And of course, we have our UI and UX designers, so they will create these seamless and effortless user experiences. So these people will focus on functional and aesthetic approach as we defined them earlier. So again, that includes user studies, figuring out what people are using their product, trying to do these user studies and try to find these people, and then of course actually designing the components and the transitions and stuff like that. Now we have development. So the developers will receive a blueprint that they need to implement. So the developers they'll actually code the front end, back end, API, and so on. And they usually follow their own process. This is something we will cover, I believe, in tomorrow's lecture, or if not tomorrow, very soon. So there are certain, development processes like agile, waterfall, um, but the software engineers, the software developers, they will generally receive, these designs, and they'll have to put them in motion and actually get the code written. After that, we have testing. So developers are involved in this process, and they do write tests and test the functionality of the product that they're working on. In industry, there are often people focused on testing, and we would call that QA or quality assurance. Now, these people will write tests and give feedback to developers on bug fixes. And so there's a lot of back and forth in terms of arrows between development and testing to make sure things are working. I would say another benefit of actually separating the development and testing is just to improve the likelihood of catching bugs. So usually the QA, like the people in testing, will know very little about the internal mechanics of what the code is. So they will just have, expected inputs and outputs. And so that is often a better way to test it, just so it's not so dependent on exactly how the code was written, but more dependent on, what were user inputs and what are the outputs that we're expecting for our product to give. So that's actually one reason why they will separate it. Someone asked API. Yeah, so API stands for Application Programming Interface. So API is very relevant when it comes to communicating between client and server. Can I please exchange strategy again? For sure. So let's see. So strategy is the first thing that will need to be thought about, and probably one of the more important things, I would say. So we have market researchers, product managers. These people will conduct research and ideate on what product might be needed on that market. And this is especially relevant when it comes to generating revenue, because if you're trying to make money, you do need people to do research and figure out exactly what sort of users will you have. What is the market like? What is our expected revenue? Does it cover all the cost of development and the as well as the time take? Does it justify the time spent on the product as well? So that's the strategy phase of the design process. Exactly. Yeah. All right. So after deployment of the product, or after testing, comes the deployment of the product. And so again, this is when the product actually goes to market. Now, there might be more testing. There are alpha tests, beta tests, where the product will be deployed for certain people, and that's also something that can happen just to test it a bit more before it's actually put into the market. And it doesn't end at development. It can go back because there's a lot of back and forth. Like new features can be added, there can be product expansions, more market research is constantly being done because users are changing, users' interests are changing, the market is changing. So this process is quite dynamic. There's a lot of back and forth. I think often, like sometimes you will, there will be, um, Amazon, like a company like Amazon or YouTube, they might like write up a blog post about some feature that they're thinking of implementing, and they might even ask like users for feedback. So that's actually part of the market research, and it's part of also what can happen after deployment. It's part of why a lot of these sites they will have like a user feedback option, and all that feedback is being taken into consideration. So a good way to think of alpha versus beta testing is that yeah, alpha testing typically happens like within the organization, whereas beta testing will take place in the user's environment. So a good example would be, QA would probably do alpha testing, whereas beta testing would be done by actual users, or at least a certain subset of users who are like accepted into the beta testing program. Yeah. So I would say the biggest takeaway from this design process is that there's a lot of collaboration. There are more areas in tech than just software engineer. So while it's still it's actually very advantageous to have a background in software engineering. So, if you're in strategy, being a software engineer in strategy sort of puts you at an advantage because now you have an idea of, how might you want to, because you're thinking about how someone might code the actual product while you're doing research and ideating on the product. So you have a better idea of what is possible. This is also true in UI UX design as well. You have an idea of what is possible in testing as well. It makes you more familiar with the internal mechanics of how this product is working or how the features working. But also, since we will get you to work on your own applications, um, you you will be sort of doing all of this. Maybe not in this case, but in the future, or if you decide to work on personal projects, especially if there's monetary incentive involved, you are doing all of these things. You're the market researcher, the product manager, the designer, the developer, the tester, and also handling deployment as well, which is something we will cover definitely. Yeah. So if you do decide to choose, strictly software engineering as a career path, then you are here. So you are here in this huge process. So now I'd like to talk about principles of good UI design. Actually, here someone has a question. So yeah, a developer would typically only focus on the development stage, but there's a lot of back and forth, and I would say also in industry there are people who are like halfway between different stages. And when it comes to the strategy phase, I would the sorts of people who would contribute, you have market researchers, product managers, even like psychologists. I remember one of my lab PIs when I was in a lab was actually like a human psychology researcher, and now he's a user experience researcher at Amazon. So it is like there are a lot of different kinds of people who are working in the strategy phase because again we're dealing with people with users, so it kind of makes sense you would have like psychologists there as well. Yeah. So now I want to cover user stories, which is a very important principle of good design. So user stories are meant to be concise, user-focused descriptions of a software feature or functionality. Now, ideally, they will follow a structured format. So, generally the format would be as a and then blank. And then in the blank, the person would say, what type of user they are. And then the person would say, I want blank. And that's where they put in their desired action. And then they'd end it with so that blank. And then it ends with the desired outcome of that action. I will actually copy and paste that into the chat just so everyone can see that format. But I'll also make sure I will put that on the slides before they're posted, so that bit's a bit more clear. So yeah, that's just an example of like the best structured way in which you would write a user story. So user story would be like the beginning. This is probably what the UI, the user researcher would do in the market or the strategy phase, is that they will try to figure out what sort of users they have, and then they'll give this to the user experience researchers who will actually make these user stories. They will interview people. They will find out, what do people want in an application that does that has some functionality, like a search, engine or something of that sort. And so the users would, the users or these people who are being asked these questions, they will write or they will give their answer in the form of this user story. And so user stories express user requirements in a very easy way. So by easy, I mean in reference to the designer. And I'll show you exactly what this means with an example. Exactly, yeah. Sitemap of ideas is a good way to put it. So let's consider the following user story as an example. Oh yeah. They also keep the user's needs at the forefront, which was sort of said. So here's an example of a user story. As a website visitor, I want to use a search bar to quickly find relevant information I'm interested in. So the user type, so this is like the user, they're a website visitor, and the action that they're going to do is they want to use a search bar, and then the outcome of that is that they want to quickly find relevant information. All right, so the user type, visitor, the action, they want to use a search bar, and then the benefit or the outcome is they want to quickly find relevant info. So that's how these things are sort of broken down in a very systematic way. Can anyone think of any user stories that they'd like to share? Like it could be for any sort of application, doesn't have to be a search engine. I'm thinking someone on an e-commerce site will probably say like, I want to be able to, click a button so I can enter my credit card information, or I could even, delete my credit card information, or maybe they'll also say, I want to have the ability to link my PayPal, so I don't actually have to give credit card information. So those are all different examples of like user stories that we can mention. All right. So let's continue. Another benefit of user stories is that it makes our job easier when it comes to wireframing. So this is typically the next step of our UI design process. So wireframing is a visual representation of our web page or app screen. It helps designers plan where to put elements like buttons, text, images, input fields, all these sorts of things. So to that effect, it shows us the placement of key components and the overall page structure. But very importantly, it does not include colors or any detailed visuals or any real content. And so the wireframing will typically come after the initial user research. So this is like the first step of the actual designing. This is right after user story. So, generally you'll go from user stories to wireframing. And we are going to use the previous user story, which was a person who was a visitor to a search site. They want to be able to easily search up information that's relevant to them. Oh, that's great. Yeah. I want the Uber Eats app to save my favorite restaurant food to order quickly next time. That's excellent. That's an excellent user story. Yeah. All right. So we're going to start with this user story. So user type is visitor. Action is user search bar. Oh yeah, someone's raised their hand. Yeah, feel free
Um,
to ask.
the user stories, does that come during the testing phase? Is that when like that's for?
So user stories typically come during this would be like the research phase. So usually it is around the time between strategy and UI design. Yeah, I can go back and show exactly where that would be.
So is it like the company, for example, that's working on the app or like the person that's working on the app, um like they're the ones considering the user stories, right? This is not like once it's in the testing phase.
Yeah, this is done beforehand. So usually like right between strategy and UI UX design, we'll have user studies because the UX designers are the ones who will, it's part of their user experience focus is that they will like do research on users and they will try to get users to make these user stories or yeah, the users will respond as they do, but then they will out of that response they'll make user stories.
So does that not kind of incorporate like the testing part as well then?
So testing is strictly related to development. So once the code is already there and features have been implemented, then testers will typically these are like QA people. So they will sort of they know what the inputs are to features and they know the outputs. And so they will write tests to test that. That's not code specific. So that the testing is more related to the code itself that the developers have written. The UI, the UX researchers, when they make these user stories, that's like what we want to happen in a more like I guess it would be in a more like English language way. Like I want this, I want to be able to do this, or I want the Uber Eats app to save my favorite restaurants quickly, and then the developer will write the code, some like code that does that. Um, and then the tester will test that code against a whole bunch of cases to see if it's actually going to be passing tests, and it is doing that.
Okay, so the UI UX design, that's like is it more like a written thing, not code? Or
Exactly. Yeah,
is
it's more like a written thing.
oh,
So
okay.
it's literally like writing. I want the Uber Eats app to save my favorite restaurant food to order quickly next time. So that's an example of something that would happen in that phase. Yeah,
Okay, and then the developer takes that and just puts it into the like in a code format basically, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's get to our next section, which I believe was wireframing. So a wireframe is an example of, yeah, it's like a visual representation of our web page or app screen. It helps us design or plan out where to put elements, and it shows the placement of key components in a very simple way. It does not include colors, detailed visuals, or real content. So we will go from this user type, action, and benefit to, button, input, logo, and options. So that's so part of the wireframing is we take the user stories and we want to try to figure out what sort of elements are needed on the page based on that user story. So in this case, this user is like they want to have a search engine that they can use easily. And so the elements that they come up with are buttons. So we probably want buttons. We want like a search button, especially. We want an input field. So an input field is just something that will take user input now from their keyboard, or even from it could be other sorts of input like audio input. But in this case, we'll just be considering like text input that you type in. They probably want a logo. So or at least a logo, we would want to put a logo because we want to be able to differentiate our search engine from other search engines. So we would put our logo there. And then, they mention they want to find relevant info. So it might be good to have an option setting for, a little bit more customizability on what relevant info might be. So let's see what sort of wireframe we can come up with. So here's an example, a very simple example. So this is what I mean by wireframe. Like there's no actual like content or like detailed visuals. It's just really simple. So again, we have our options, we have our search bar, and then in that search bar, there's a little search button that you click to search, or maybe even, users should be able to probably press enter and search as well. And then we have our logo on top. So that's just an example of that. Does anyone have any questions yet, or any questions in general? Let's. I'm just gonna check the chat for sure. Nachla? I can't actually. I can't. I cannot hear you. So feel free to type your question in the chat. Just because I can't hear you. Yeah, there's no voice. Excellent question. Where do where do designers create this wireframing? So usually there are things like Figma. Figma is a really good tool. I'm sure there are others, but I've used Figma in the past. It's great for wireframing. All right. Nodge. Okay, so option, I mean, it might not be useful. I just put it there as an example because, you know, the when I put these buttons here, that's not like the actual size of the button might be a lot smaller, and what it looks like might be a lot smaller. I just put it like that size there just so I could get the text in and everyone could see that text options. But now that I'm thinking about it, it might be better to put the options like on the left side of the search bar, just as a very tiny gear icon or something like that. So yeah, probably a better way to better place to put the options. So I'm not sure if we're going to do wireframing. We might be. We may have workshops on that. But yeah, Figma is generally used for wireframing. I mean, certainly when you're working on your own apps, you can certainly do wireframing. Yeah.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, no, okay, just checking. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Okay, so I think is the blueprint. Exactly, yeah, that's a good way of thinking. Wireframing is the blueprint of the website. Yeah. Okay, so Wix is that's a good example because I see ads for that all the time. Wix is like Wix does all of the design for you, essentially, or at least the front end, it seems. I've never used Wix, but it seems like you can sort of very easily make the website using designs. Now, the only issue with Wix is just that even if you can customize things, I'm not sure how haven't used it, but I'm not sure how the code would work on the back end because usually, you make a button, and if you want the button when someone clicks it to actually run something, some code to like get something from a server, I'm not actually sure how Wix does that. Um, yeah, but I do. Wix is a tool that is used to design websites. Oh, awesome. Yeah. I don't think I've heard of WordPress, or if I have, I do not remember. All right, so I'm just gonna, I think now might be a good time just to take 5 minutes, a 5 minute break. If anyone has questions, feel free to, ask them or type them in the chat. But I think we can just take 5 minutes um, just to think about what has been covered so far, ask any questions, any clarifications. For sure, I can upload the lecture right now. I'll just end the screen share so I can do that really quickly. So, all right, we are back. I hope everyone had a great break. Here, let's see. Someone is just checking out some of these questions. Exactly, yeah. Wireframing is you can think of it like that. It's like you're coming up with the solution to the user story, as we can see here, before by implementing elements needed to solve that issue. Exactly, yeah. Which one is more? So both are actually used because UI is user interface, so that's the person who's focused on making very nice designs and animations. UX is user research, so figuring out what sorts of users they have, making user stories. These two usually work. They work hand in hand, so they're both used in web design. Yeah. Yes. Someone has Abdul Razak.
Yes, sir. How are you?
I'm pretty good.
I wonder, what are we going to be prepared in this course? Are we going to be more focused on the UI or the UX? Or,
So
or
our focus will be on the development aspect, but we will also cover, we'll have workshops and different lectures will cover different parts. Like this lecture is covering, UI, design, UX and UI design, and we'll get more into that in the following slides.
okay, so the purpose of this question is I wanted to know what is the marketplace expecting out of me when I get hired?
Right. So I would say, like many things, it's good to have good designs. It makes a good impression, but functionality is more important, having something that's working. If you're during an interview with your employer, yeah, functionality is more important. But having something that looks nice is good, makes a good impression, but it's also not that difficult to make something that looks nice. Like, even these slides, these slides are pretty good, I'd say, but they didn't take too long to make. So, we'll go more into exactly how you would go about, what are some principles you can follow to make good designs. That's something that we will cover very shortly.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So I thought we'd also look into some industry, examples of what wireframes can look like. So I have one wireframe here. It might be a bit hard to see on like the slide here, but you can see this, like it's super simple. They just have circles for like, presumably where someone's, profile picture would go, username and stuff like that. Um, Buttons, and then I believe this is a site where they can buy and sell products. So you have like model name, amount, and so on. But just the general idea is that it's very bare bones, very simple. Here's another example just by hand. So you can also do these by hand. There's no need to do them, you know, on some sort of platform. So here's an example of someone making a website by hand. So you have nav bar, the hero section with your headline, the about section about your product, values of your product, and so on. So moving onward from wireframing, we have branding, which is typically going to come next. So this is where we, add in color elements, and it's very important to actually have consistent branding. So we want to maintain consistent and uniform presentation across the website. So if the primary color is blue, maybe the buttons should be blue. If one of your font colors is like white, like in this case, I'm using white font, and notice how I'm almost using it everywhere. I don't just have random fonts, of different colors. So branding includes, color schemes, fonts, so that, font color, but also font family. So I'm actually using the same font family for everything here. And, choice of logos as well as icons and imagery. So yeah, this slide deck has very specific branding. There's a purple background, a white font color, the same font style, which I believe is Tree Figma, and I'm highlighting the titles to make them purple, and then the subtitles have no highlighting, just to differentiate those two things a little bit easier. Exactly, yeah. So I just mentioned there, what this slide deck is using. So let's take a look at a professional design identity. And this is an example from a friend of mine, branding or design identity. You can use those interchangeably. So this is a friend of mine. He made this example. Now he's worked professionally in UI UX. So when we were actually doing a personal project together, and he helped make these designs. So he basically made. So this is one example of a branding that he made. So you can see the different accents, even fonts, and header text. They even have input fields here, buttons, what those look like. Oh, do you have a question?
Ладно. Я потом сюда подойду. Где вместе с вами.
All right, so that's one example of branding. We have another example of branding here. So this is like slightly different, but both of these were actually made by him. So I would say this is almost like industry level example of your branding or your design identity. Everything will just be put in one place. So whoever's working on your designs, typically this would be in Figma. They can very easily like select these colors or select this font. So there are a few more examples of what would be considered good UI principles. I put all of these in the same category because they fall under visual aesthetics. So intuitive navigation. So intuitive navigation means ensuring the user can very easily explore the website. So nav bars, menus, stuff like that, they're easy to read and they're easy to follow. We also have visual hierarchy. So this has to do with using cues like headings and fonts and colors to create a visual hierarchy where important content will stand out. An example in the slide deck, so I tried to accomplish this, and I didn't even know the term visual hierarchy when I was making this at the start, but it's sort of unconsciously, it makes sense that you want to separate important content from not important content. So that's part of the reason why the title has that highlight, whereas the subtitle does not. And also the font size is a bit smaller as well. Another interesting thing I actually found online was, when they mention, visual hierarchy is using the golden ratio when it comes to font size. So my title size is 40, my subtitle size is 25, and then the bullet points are 15. Now, each of those is the previous one divided by the golden ratio. And the golden ratio is just this very general, it's this certain number. It's found, across nature. It's considered a ratio of harmony. So it's just interesting that that's something that is in design as well. Yeah. There's also, usage of white space. So when it comes to white space, that refers to ensuring elements have sufficient spacing. So, these different bullet points, there is enough space between each of them so that you can read them quite easily. And so there's no overcrowding. So, an example of that could be Larry's Cars. So now that website had a lot of stuff on a single page. And that was a great example of overcrowding. Whereas the other, car financing site, I don't exactly remember the name, but it was it had, that was a good example of white spacing. We also have responsive design. So when it comes to responsive design, that has to do with how easy is it for your website to change in response to screen size, and if it does change in response to screen size, are the relative elements and components still preserved in a way that supports the ideal user experience. So you might remember, I remember from a few lectures ago, Amazon was brought up, and the size of the screen changed, like a lot changed. Maybe I can actually find that and see if might be able to show like an example of that. Let's see. Can everyone see this on the screen? Just feel free to type in the chat if you can see that. Okay, awesome. So an example of this, so notice how like the website looks like that, and then as I decrease this, it's quite responsive. Like it resizes everything. There's no like, it's not like things are being cut off. So that's a good example of responsive design. Cross-browser compatibility is also quite important. So we want to ensure that all the previous things mentioned, intuitive navigation, visual hierarchy, white space, responsive design, we want to make sure that all of these things persist across different browsers, Chrome, Edge, Firefox, because sometimes these different browsers have different spacing and there are other, minor changes, and that could certainly affect, how it looks. So that's something to keep in mind. There's also the question of accessibility. So this is a very important part of UI design, and it refers to last one and visual hierarchy for sure. So visual hierarchy has to do with making sure that visual cues like headings, fonts, and colors create a clear visual hierarchy where the important content will stand out. And so an example of that could be like in this slide deck, to separate the heading from the subheading. The heading, Principles of Good Design, has that highlight to it, whereas the subheading does not. So that's an example of visual hierarchy. And cross-browser compatibility is just, making sure all of these other things that have been mentioned persist across different browsers. So accessibility is also a very important part of UI design. So this refers to creating interfaces that can be used by as many people as possible, including individuals with disabilities. So some key principles include perceivable. So the user interface has to be presented in a way that's perceivable regardless of one's abilities. So, provide alternative text for images. So users who have vision impairments, they can understand the context of images, as well as captions for videos for those who might be deaf or hard of hearing. Taking into account color blindness as well in the design when you're sort of thinking what colors go where. Should be operable, so optimizing keyboard accessibility for users who have difficulty operating a mouse, so they can still navigate the website with the use of a keyboard or the keyboard shortcuts. And also having your website be able to handle voice commands for those with limited mobility. And again, allows them to navigate and make use of the site without physical input. Having a website that's understandable. So this makes the website easy, making the website easy to understand and navigate. It makes the experience better for everyone. The website's more accessible overall, as well as robustness. So robustness has to do with designing the UI in a way so as to allow ongoing improvements in accessibility to actually be implemented. Now, we won't go into detail into how this is done now, but there are very standardized ways to do this. Even to do all of these, like there are built-in parts within the HTML. We'll discuss that later, but there are very clear-cut ways to do this. And in fact, there are even guidelines that you actually have to follow, and these guidelines do delineate, what sort of accessibilities are are going to be required on your website. And now I'm not sure how they enforce that, but I do believe that, you know, not following these, at least when I was working, no, I remember having to put in a feature where, you know, the tab, you know, pressing the tab key would go from one input to another. And I remember, you know, not if you actually don't follow that, it will negatively impact search and you know, this how the search engine will find your site. So these are, you know, very important things to keep in mind, you know, not only to help to make sure everyone can use the site, but it also would impact things like revenue and, you know, how many people are even finding your website. So before we proceed to our demo, there's one final thing I want to discuss, and that is A/B testing. So A/B testing is regularly used in the industry. It involves creating two different versions of the same digital asset. I do believe, yeah, it's definitely possible. Like, there's definitely a way to do that. So, like, you could have the speakers, or you can have something like an AI voice or something like that read out the text that's on the page. I think Chrome might actually have some extensions that do that. Yeah. So yeah, when it comes to A/B testing, this is something that is used pretty often in industry. So it's why I wanted to mention it, because it is, you know, it is part of the design process, but more so it's part of the design process once your app has been deployed and you have active users, especially. Now, A/B testing involves creating two different versions of some digital asset, version A and version B. You can even have more versions, but generally it's two versions. And this includes, you know, the digital asset can include single features like buttons or input bars, but can also extend to an entire web page. So what happens during A/B testing is that visitors, when they visit your site, they'll be randomly assigned to one of two versions. Now, you might have noticed if you and your friend might like go on, you know, Amazon or something, there might be times when your display looks a little bit different than the others. And like, not in terms of content, but in terms of actual design, it might be something you've noticed. And so, you know, why this happens, it's because, again, visitors, they're randomly assigned to one of two versions, and then data is actually being collected to help designers compare these and choose which design is better. So, you know, what do we mean by better? So a lot of data is collected. The sorts of data that I'm usually referring to is click-through rate. So click-through rate is a comparison of the number of people who click something versus those who have seen it. And of course, that also includes the number of people who have clicked it. So let's say if your click-through rate is like 10%, it would mean that, you know, of all the people who have seen this button, let's say it's a button, 10% of people actually click that button, which is not actually, it's not a bad click rate. That's actually a pretty good click-through rate. Especially, you know, if you have tens of thousands or, you know, hundreds of thousands of people viewing your site, you know, every day, that's actually a very good click-through rate. So here's an example of an A/B test. You know, A, register form, and so on, continue, sign into my account. And then we have version B where it changes the text. It says, hello, what's your name? And then instead of continue, it has create your account. And then if you already have an account, then you're directed to sign into my account. So you know, B, I would say that, you know, a difference here is that B is sort of like if you, it starts with the assumption that you don't have an account. But if you already have an account, then you click that. Whereas part A, it seems that it assumes that you do have an account. And so, sorry, actually, it seems like it also assumes you don't have an account, but just the design is a bit different in terms of what's on the buttons and how users would navigate through this. We also have another example here, version A versus version B. And it seems like version B is a better click-through rate. And again, 10% is really high. Usually we have like single-digit click-through rates. So 10% is actually really good. And all they did here, I think they slightly different video and the color is a bit darker. So these are usually very minor changes. Yeah, so you can change the words, but the reason why the reason like the purpose behind this is that you actually want to gather user data. Like, how are users using your app? And are there ways that we can definitively measure one design as being better than another design? And so that's actually the purpose of A/B testing. If one, and I can give an example from actually a really good example that can help illustrate that point. Click-through rate. So click-through rate. Click-through rate is that's a sort of like data that is being collected during A/B testing. And so click-through rate, that is a comparison of the number of people who click something versus those who have seen it. So an example, let's say your rate is click-through rate, exactly. So an example of an A/B test. So this is exactly, yeah. Version B is, well, it's not that version B is attracting more traffic, it's that more people who see version, like a greater proportion of people who see version B will click that button to go further into the website. So it's not attracting, yeah, exactly. One thing to mention is that like click-through rate is just one example of of the type of data collected. There's a lot more data that is being collected, and there are additional statistics that are taken into account when it comes to A/B testing. In fact, one example is one time when I was working. So this example shows that there is a lot of money on the line, and you only realize it when you do an A/B test. So there's a lot of money when it comes to like these small details. These are quite important. Yes, there's also the time taken to click is also something that is also recorded. And yes, the goal is to evolve which design is like aesthetically richer, because we don't want to put work into a design that is not good. So, we'll have initial designs, those will be put out, they'll be tested with A/B testing, and then generally the better versions picked, and then that's iterated on further. How can that be made better? So one interesting example that shows that a lot of money can be on the line, even for like tiny details. So it does have functionality. So, both of these versions, if you click the button, the website will proceed. The idea behind this is like let's say two users, one user gets version A and one user gets version B. So, one user sees a certain design and the website's still functional. Everything, they're clicking things, they're still going through the site. Another user sees version B. It's just as functional. They just see different things. And so that's the idea behind it. A good example could be one time when I was working, a single button that had to do with purchasing one of our products. We did an A/B test on that. So, it was the same button, a green button with a white background, like with white text, like purchase. All we did was the first one just had the button with the text purchase, and then the other one had purchase, or I think it might have had secure transaction also. And then there was like a lock icon. And so when we tested this, we actually found that the one with the lock icon had like more people were buying it. So or more people were clicking it. And this was a purchase button, right? So, that actually means there's more revenue, like directly there's more revenue. So it's a pretty significant difference. You know, a lot is on the line here when it comes to these sorts of things. How to collect statistics? That's a great question. Usually there are tools you can use that you can like integrate into your code to not only make the A/B tests themselves, but to also collect user data. So those are, yeah, so like they have, you know, these are all things that have been developed and can be used. Yes, you have a question?
Yeah, so I think I'm still kind of confused because I thought the UI and UX design was like before like the coding stuff was implemented. So I would have assumed that there was no functionality in the um like in this part of the phase. Or is this past like the UI UX design phase?
Yes, this is like path launch. And
Oh, okay.
this is like when they're trying to figure out, you know, what improvements can we make to our UI design. And then the UI designers would be like, okay, here's one version, and then here's another version, but like we're not sure which one's better. So why don't you make an A/B test and like have some subset of users only see version A and some subset use see version B. And
So
then yeah.
so do they hop back to the U like is that something that like continuously gets revisited as the testing phase goes like further? Is that what this is kind of referring to?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of back and forth. Like it's not that like strategy sort of map is very streamlined and quite simplified, but there's a lot of back and forth, you know, when it comes to things like this. Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Alrighty, so let's oh yeah, Abdul Rasad.
Yes, sir. About the previous picture, yeah, here. Like technically speaking, this is possible. Logically speaking, like this is possible to be done, but I'm not being able to visualize the technical aspect. So to
For
visualize it,
sure,
I might, yeah.
like the code itself, or
Let's not dive into code details, but could you verbally explain how does this get done? Is it when you deploy the website, you deploy two different version or with two different URL, or like how does this gonna work?
oh yeah, for sure. So it's not there won't be two different URLs. So usually it'll be the same URL. I think I'll use that example of that button, the you know the transaction button I mentioned, where adding a lock increase the revenue.
Mhm.
So what'll happen is this is after deployment. You know, my boss just had an idea. Let's put a lock icon on the button. And so he did that. And all he did was in the code, you can basically make you can like create something that's like an A/B test. And that it's there's a library that does it. And it can handle it'll handle figuring out, you know, which version to show, basically.
Okay,
But
so that
in like in your code, you'll have two buttons. And then this is after deployment, and then you can just, you know, deployment is continuous. It's not like it happens once because changes can be made and it can be deployed again. And so then you'll have both buttons in the code. And then, you know, the library will handle showing, you know, one button to some, you know, random numbers of users and the other button to another subset of users.
okay. Okay, so this algorithm, it's not going to interface with the same user two eyes, like showing the same user two different version, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the same user will not see two versions. The one user to one version.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
All right, let's start with our demo. So when it comes to our demo, our first demo, we're going to check out a website design together and discuss, you know, pros and cons of choices used. So yeah, let me open a website. Let's see, maybe like Does anybody have any ideas for like websites that they might want to check out? You know, Amazon, YouTube, or something like that. Netflix. Okay, awesome. I'm not sure if logged in, but maybe we can still see YouTube. YouTube's a good example. We'll do a couple. We'll do Netflix, Amazon. All right, so let's think about what pros and cons of our design choices. So, you know, right away, this is actually pretty good. I like this. I like the choice of having a background image on Netflix with like, because this is sort of what Netflix looks like, right? We have these movies that you can sort through. Exactly. Yeah, it's very simple. And yeah, if anyone wants to like add commentary, you know, feel free to, you know, unmute and just, you know, also mention things that they're noticing here. Like the email address, you know, this is, oh, it's even, you know, it even saves your email address, get started. Even that, like when you click that, the email address, that like that text stays there. It just gets smaller at the top. Awesome. Yeah, this unlimited movies, TV shows, and more. Exactly. Watch anywhere, cancel anytime. Even like this, you can sign in really easily, or you can change the language. But seems like right now they only have English and French. Oops. I think I could probably Google Translate that to more, but so actually this is a con to me that I can't see. It might be because I'm in incognito, but I can't actually see the other options. And also, it's not the same as, you know what I mean? Like I would like, that's actually a con that I'm thinking of now, that this drop down should also be transparent like this. Like notice how this drop down here is transparent. Like you can see through it. But when you click that, this is not transparent. So that's something I do not like. But yeah, for sure. And let's see, oh, there's even like, this is not too bad. I like this. They have a notice how, you know, they have an icon of popcorn there because that's related to like, you know, watching movies and TV shows. Font color needs to change for sure. Which font color? I'm just curious. All right, so there are a few. Let's see what else we have. I like this, you know, learn more. Right, and this takes us to here. Now this is actually also very simple. In Safari, it's interesting. So in Safari, this is a different, I'm assuming that the background in Safari, yeah, oh nice, someone shared a photo. Oh wow, yeah, and so in Safari, they actually have that, it's different. I wonder if it's, but it's the same issue, but I think just in Safari, it's black, this background. I think that's why it doesn't look as bad. It might be a system setting. It could be, yeah. So like, you know, already these there's so many like elements of design. You also notice here like visual hierarchy. Like this is obviously like bold text, and then this is a lot smaller. So your eye is immediately drawn to this section first, and then here after, right? Even these buttons, like the buttons are quite big. So it's like they won't put a tiny button there. They'll put a large button so you can easily see it and very quickly click. Interesting. Okay. It might be user settings then. Yeah, I like this section too. It's like they have, and this is animated. They have this is sort of like what it would actually look like. I think that's a good thing to put on a page like this. enjoy on your TV, smart TV, PlayStation, Xbox, and so on. They have that too. Watch everywhere. Again, this is amazing. They have like your iPhone, tablet, and PC. And it would be cool. You notice how these are not animating, and I think the reason why these are not animated is because it would probably um, distract you from this. But what they could do is they could put whatever they're playing here, they could put it here and here. But maybe that would be too much. Interesting. Yeah, overall it's pretty good. This is a great website design. Even like this frequently asked questions. So this animation, I think this might be a GIF. Let's see. Oh, interesting. So I can't actually, it might be due to incognito, but I'm just getting a PNG file when I try to open that. But I'm pretty sure this is a GIF, not a video. Or it could be a video as well. Yeah. I also like that they have frequently asked questions, like what is Netflix? How much does it cost? Where can I watch? How do I cancel? And they might use a green screen for sure. Yeah. I noticed that. So I think we're going to stick with Netflix because we do want enough time for the second demo. And then here in the footer, they have all this other information. Oh, for sure. So I just right-clicked that and I clicked Open Image in New Tab. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, Netflix is hiring. Yeah, and it's like a totally different. Now the site changes a bit. And I notice like when I scroll down this nav bar, it's. I think the term for it is sticky, so it sticks to the top no matter where I am. If I want to go somewhere else. Um, awesome. All right, so we're going to continue with I think that was a pretty good example, Netflix. We're going to do our second demo now. Now, this will be a review of everything we learned today in this lecture. We are going to design a hobby app. So we're going to pick an app. Collectively, we'll choose, what to design, what sort of website or application. We'll make user stories, and then break these down into user type, action, and benefit. And then think about what components will be needed to fulfill this. Then we're going to build a wireframe and then decide on a design identity, like font type, color, background, stuff like that. And then we're going to design. So what I can do is I can open let me see, how can I do that? Okay, give me one sec. I'm going to make a whiteboard, but what I'll actually do is I will snip this out so we can see this on the whiteboard. I'm going to stop sharing for a sec. Alrighty, can everyone see that whiteboard? Perfect. All right, so we will go step by step. I will be taking in everyone. Please feel free to provide user input. So, we can do a good job here. So let's think about this. So what are some, does anyone have any examples of websites that they might want to build as this hobby app? Okay, music, like a music website where you can see music, graphic design. Okay. Any others? I think I might go with music because music sounds a little bit easier than some of the other. Oh, social media. Awesome. Social media is pretty good. All right. So I think let's do social media. I think social media is a good example. All right. So let's think about some user stories for this app. So we're gonna do social media. Let me type that in. Social media is our website of choice. And okay, so I just want to see while I'm typing, can people see like what I'm typing while I type it? I just typed something so everyone can tell that they can see test 1, 2, 3. Oh, for sure. How do I zoom in? Oh, there we go. Everyone can see that, right? Okay, great. I'm going to type in user stories as people mention them. We're just going to do this by hand on this platform. We're going to learn together. All right. Does anyone have any? Let's think about it. So, a social media website. What are some examples of user stories we can think of? So remember, user story is, the type of user you are, what you want to be able to do, and then what action you want to come out of it. So that example from earlier was, I will put an example here actually. Example that was as a visitor, I want to be able to search something I type in and see relevant information. That's an example of user story. Can you think of some user stories for our social media website? Perfect. So I want people in my area, let's write that down, find me and add me as a friend. As a user, I want to search for friends. Okay. Are there any other user stories we can think of specifically for this social media website? Great. I want to be able to share photos. All right. I want to. Okay, actually, that's pretty. All right. I want to send messages. Yeah, let's put as a user. This is just a generic user. User, I want to be able to share photos. As a user, I want to send messages. As a user, I want to people. What about login? Does anyone think login would be a good thing? As a user, I want to be asked to log in. Okay, awesome. Want to be asked, or I want to be able to log in. And I think that is first, like, before anything else, like, exactly, yeah, privacy policy for sure. All right, awesome. I
You
will
see,
zoom out slightly.
I'm having an issue. I can see the whiteboard, but I can't, and I can see your cursor, but I can't see what you're typing.
Uh-oh. Here, let's see. So you might need to scroll down or zoom out, or you may have scrolled sideways. Because if you see, like, I'm on a certain section of the screen. So let's see.
I can see the cursor and I could see the box in which you were apparently typing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wait, let me see. I want to.
No, now I can't see the pink box. Before I saw an orange one. Yeah. You
I'm just
can
trying to
see
see if you were in the if like you're in the whiteboard. It says it here. So you can see my cursor, but you
I can
can't
see
see
your
like.
cursor. And it says sign in now to avoid losing access to the whiteboard after the meeting. It says sign in here, but I click on it and nothing's happening. And I don't know why I need to sign in. I have zoomed out.
What I can do is, as we proceed through it, I can take screenshots of what I've written and then paste it in the chat.
Mhm. Should I log in again? I don't know.
That could work. You can also try that. Yeah.
Let me just do that. Okay.
Is anyone else having issues with seeing the whiteboard? No? Okay. All right. Yeah, you can try joining the call again and just see if that works. If that doesn't work, just let me know and I will make screenshots as I move along so you can see like all the updates and everything that I'm writing. And also this will be available after. I think I'll export this as a PDF and we'll also upload this. Yeah. All right, so yes, Najla.
Are we gonna use this platform? What is this platform that you write things right away, in your page?
This is just Zoom like whiteboard.
With Zoom.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
we
but
don't have access to
there are a
the
lot of platforms you can use. Google Slides is a good one. Like any platform that's just lets you sort of do these things where you can make text and make shapes. You can even like draw on like a piece of paper your wireframe. Yeah, so
Oh,
it's not. Yeah,
thank you.
ideally people actually do wireframes in Figma, but Figma is I'm not like good enough at Figma to very quickly make things as a lecturer. So yeah, that's why I
Is it
chose
for free or
the
do we have
wireframe.
to pay?
Figma's for free. Yeah, you can
Oh,
get a
okay,
free
I will
version.
check. Thank you.
All right, so let's think about some components. These are, let's see, can I make, I guess I can't do it. Okay, where did that go? All right, let's think about some components. So what are some components that we need to build to support these user stories? So you probably need an input field, right? Like if you want to be able to log in, you want to be able to type. So input fields, I'll just mention that, allows you to type your information. So that takes in information from the keyboard. There's some other components. Please, everyone, feel free to either like can verbally unmute or type in the chat. Some examples of components. Login forms, excellent. Buttons, search bar, yep, search bar. Search bar technically sort of is input field, but search bar is a good example. I'm thinking maybe like logos and photos. Some, yeah, drop-down menus. For sure, camera option. So I'm gonna put that search camera option password. I'm gonna put these all as buttons. For sure, we'll get into color scheme and font later. That's the next part. Once we actually make our wireframe, then we'll do that. For sure, attached files. Multiple choice option. I think so, yeah. That might come up. We'll try to think of a case. Yeah, so I think that's the radio button. Exactly, yeah. Button, forgot password, language option. Excellent. Okay, so I'm gonna actually take a screenshot of put in the chat just in case people cannot see.
Yeah, I still cannot see it. I'm logged in and it says that I am in the whiteboard, but and it says failed to load. I don't know, on the top left corner it says failed to load. I don't know why.
It might be an internet issue. I can help you with that. I can help you with that during the lab. Just so in future, yeah, because this seemed like we're using the whiteboard for this quite often. But can you see the screenshots? I just posted some screenshots in the chat. So the screenshots have like relevant information for both what we're doing and also user stories and the components that we've sort of come up with on the right-hand side of the last screenshot.
Yes, I can see the screenshots.
Okay. Applications also a button. All right, so let's think about this. Now let's actually build the wireframe. I'm going to be doing it really easy wireframe, nothing too complicated. Let's think about this. So let's start with I think it's easier if I do it as a phone, just because it's smaller. So let's do my first wireframe. I'm going to do this is the login page. This is what we see. I think we mentioned that people want to be able to log in, right? So really simple login page. Right now, I don't want to copy that design. Let's see, rounded square, nice. Let's use the rounded square. Okay, so anyone who can't see, I have posted, wait, so, let's see. Can people see now? Okay. Just half? Can you see the login page now? Okay. I just want to make sure, like everybody, as long as you're seeing what I'm seeing, then that's good. Oh, you have to scroll yourselves. Okay. All right, so I'm just below where the user stories are. Like I just made the login page. Yeah, that's interesting. I think 125% zoom might work the best. And yeah, I'm just working right below the login page. Yeah. Or maybe even 100% zoom, so you can see a little bit more. I'm gonna move this a little bit lower. So I just scroll a little bit down. Okay. All right, so login page. Let's add a rounded square as a profile photo. I will even write in here. Let's change my text to a smaller size. File photo. And we can add more things as we go along, but let's see. So if you want to be able to log in, you probably need some inputs. Let's put an input, and we'll put 2 inputs. And what else do people think we need? Exactly, yeah. So this is the username or email. Exactly, yeah. So username. Username and password. And let's think. So what are some buttons? Exactly, yeah, that's great. Login button. I'll make that a rounded square. Are there any other buttons people can think of that we might want? Login page. Like what if you forgot password is good? Exactly. So login. I was thinking more like Okay, maybe to what's going on here? There we go. Okay. I was thinking like exactly, yeah, like create account. And maybe also instead of having, we'll just have a text, and then the text maybe would be hyperlink, and it would kind of look like this. Forgot password, like a question at the bottom. Yeah, so the login will be if you've like already have a login, that will be for that. Just I'm gonna paste another screenshot of the login page that we decided to work on. Yeah, we don't need to have, oh, actually, yeah, that's a good example. Maybe let's just make this our logo instead of the profile picture. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, so that's the login page. Let's think of what happens next. So like once you log in, maybe you want to be able to search for friends. I guess there's a couple things you'd probably want to do. Maybe the first thing of when I see login is usually you first see your friends that you can message. So it's just we'll copy this. And this is, I think this will just be, I guess I can call it landing page. I'm just to the right of the login page, the landing page. So everyone can scroll to that. All right, so I'm gonna make the landing page a little bit bigger just so everything can see everything. It's not too small. Maybe I'm gonna copy, if anyone uses Facebook Messenger, I think I'm gonna copy their design a bit. And what I'm gonna do to make things easier, I'm going to have a left-hand side where you can actually see your friends who are logged in. Small logo at the very top and menu bar. Exactly. Perfect. Perfect. So what I will do is I'll do that. See what's going on here. Okay, it's not perfect, but chat message, exactly. So I think the default selection will be, is the landing page the home page? Yes, the landing page is going to be the first page you arrive at, right? There. So what we'll do is we'll actually put a logo here. Looks really bad, but anyway, so this first logo will just be like, I guess like messages or friends or home. And that'll be like the first thing that's selected as soon as you arrive. And that's like, so this page, I would say, yeah, we can have a logout button. Exactly. So I think maybe for that, it'd be easier to, we only go up that far. And then we have a footer here. So what I think I will do for these, I will just type in footer and then header here. But I'll put stuff on top of that. Awesome. Yeah. So if header and each of these, I'm going to put like little squares in header that correspond to different options. Oh, interesting. I think my whiteboard, okay, now it's loading again. So I think for this section, it might be easier just, I'm going to draw instead of with a pen. So I'm going to have like one rectangle here, and that's like the initial when you enter, and that's going to be like the home, this messages. Like these won't be buttons, but these will sort of be, they will be buttons, but they'll be things that you can use to select to navigate. So there'll be like, exactly, yeah, like help button. Maybe here on the footer, I have like a log out button that I drew an X there. Exactly, yeah. So maybe this is like, we have messages, MSGs. These are reels. So, like YouTube shorts, like reels that your friends have posted. And, these can be other options. Maybe here we have language. Exactly, yeah. News. And maybe below here, a good thing to be on the footer is you probably just want basic text. Like I'm going to put lines for text. So we're going to have like about, contact us, help. So these lines, it's super basic, just represent text. Okay, I think that's pretty good. And then, yeah, so then I'm going to copy Messenger. And I know on Messenger, on the side, you sort of have the name and the photo of a person. That's just, it's going to be the name and the photo going down. And then when you select any of these, it opens up the conversation here. So this is the conversation. And then this is like the text box where you can, so this is the text box, text box. Exactly, yeah. So, here let's just do that here. So we have contact us, about us, provide us feedback, log out, etc. All those options on the footer. And what we can do is we can maybe make the header sticky. So as you move down, it persists on the top. So you don't need to like scroll back up to the top of your conversation to find that. Or I guess, what we could do, because the conversation is self-contained in here, it actually doesn't matter because there'll be a scroll bar here. And as you scroll down, that just updates, kind of like on Messenger, the Messenger app. All right, so let's see what comes next. Decide on a design identity. Okay, so obviously the wireframe's not done. There are quite a few more pages we might want. I think the next thing we would probably do is just make the Reels page. What's that going to look like? We're probably going to use the same header and footer, right? But just the content will be different. The same thing with news, the language option. But I think what we can work on now is let's pick a design identity. So I just moved to the right here. I'm going to type design identity. So let's pick what we want this to look like. A type, what font color do we want to use? What font type? What's our background color? What types of buttons do we want? Do we want filled buttons or transparent buttons? What about the button border, the color? So these are all things to think about. White and red. Nice. Okay. Let's go with white and red. The background color, do you mean like background color is red and the font color is white? Oh yes, my bad here. Let me gonna paste this again. So this was our change into the chat. And I will also paste the design identity that we decide on as soon as we pick it. Type, font color, background color, and button border. All right, so what sort of font type might look good? Everyone thinking of bold? Okay. I mean, like font type as in, I hope they give the option here to change fonts. Interesting. So We don't have the options for fonts here, so we're gonna have to go with our classic font. Yeah, we'll do the normal font, nothing too fancy. Font type, just put NA, because usually there are different types like Tree Figma and Open Sans, stuff like that. Yeah, unfortunately, I cannot change the font type. I can just change the text color. But we'll go with a white font on a red background. Okay. What about buttons? Do you think we should have filled or transparent buttons? So transparent button would be, I guess, it would have a border on the button so you can distinguish it from the background. Transparent button? All right. I suppose we probably should make the button white just to fit the font color. So look okay. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this landing login page. I'm going to make the actual design. Now that we've decided on a design identity, I'm going to make the actual design just on the login page. Sans serif is a good option. Yeah. All right, so let's do this. We can copy. Why is this? Oops. I see. Okay. Let's copy. Okay, so we have picked a design identity. I'm just gonna copy and paste a screenshot of the identity that we have picked. So you can see that. And then now I just moved to the right, slightly to the right on the screen. The font color on a white button should be black. Okay, so the button border is white, but we picked the button to be transparent. So I mean, we could do a black font on that, but it would, yeah. All right, so we have that. Now let's copy and paste this here. And now let's actually like start designing. So let's see. We're gonna pick fill as red. So that's that fill. Let's pick the outline as a white outline. Okay, well, actually, we'll do a black outline for the first one. We'll keep a rounded square. We have no fill. Let's do a white outline for the logo. Now, ideally, some image would go here. Let's see if I can find something that we could put. I think this looks good. Copy, and I'm going to paste that in here. So anyone can see that chat image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to slightly decrease the size of that. We don't need that image anymore. We can just put this in, and maybe I can add a border around this. Yeah, landing pages typically for that, but it can also mean just like the first page that you're on when you enter the app. I guess homepage would be better, would be a better name for that. So yeah, just change that to homepage. All right, so let's think about this username. So I think that for username, maybe a white fill, and then I liked that design where they had a no fill and then a white. I remember the Netflix design, and we can decrease the border thickness. And I remember the Netflix design. I can't quite get it on here, but I remember that when you actually clicked it, then the thing went up. So I think that would be. I might actually decrease the font, and what I'll do is I think make the text color white. So that's what a user would see when they click that. That'll disappear. We'll also do that for the other. So we'll change it to white. We'll change the outline thickness to 1 point. And then text color to white, and the text size to size 10. And then for both of these, we can do the same thing. We can length white, then decrease individually. We can make the text color all right, so that's a really simple example. How does everyone feel about that? Any changes I could make? What I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna post an image of like a formal, like what it would look like in industry. I think maybe the background, let's go for something like maybe purple. So now it looks like Discord. Username and password box should be slightly darker. For sure, yeah. Let me change the, maybe let's change that to gray. Or maybe, I think now that it's like purple, it might be good to go with a darker color. So now you can see as you sort of go through this process of, designing the, things can change. They don't need to stay the same. Let's see, let's see this text. How does purple look? Oh, no, you can't even see that. Yeah, let's just do, so now gradient, yeah, great, absolutely. I think I used a gradient in my slides. All right, how's that? So I just changed it to purple, and now you notice how because it's purple, it probably looks better to change the text to a darker color. All right, so I'm just going to post another image, and I think we can look at this a little bit. I'm posting this because I just want to show a more formal example of what it looks like to go from a wireframe to an actual design. Let's see. Wireframe design image. I can just find this really quickly before we go on to our lab. All right, here's a great example. So just copy and paste this image into the whiteboard. I'm gonna paste it, it's a pretty big image, so I'm actually just I'm gonna move to the left and then down slightly. I'll paste it here. I'll actually enlarge it quite a bit so everyone can see that. I just moved, I'm just slightly below where user stories or where the home page is. I'm also going to paste in the chat what we went with in terms of design. I'll also paste this image. I'll paste a link to the image. So this is the industry level sort of what it looks like. As you can see, it looks a lot nicer. So notice how they're designed. It might be a bit hard to see that, but notice how like they still have, because it's a phone, it's like the outline will be still a phone, and they even have like the keyboard coming up. So that's an example. The top is the wireframe, and just on the bottom, that's like actually now they're starting to design it. So they've picked typography, they've picked all these sorts of things that they want to pick for what do bars look like, what do keywords look like, what about alerts, and so now they're actually picking the things that they'll use to make the actual design. So you can sort of imagine what it might look like. All right, so I think
Sorry, I just have a really quick question. Is prototyping the same as wireframe?
good question. So a wireframe is just like you're sort of using, I guess how I would think of it is the wireframe as you're thinking more about what it might look like in a very simple way. So it was just the example that I showed you. Everyone was like very poorly drawn, but it just had the, I think it was, if you scroll up a little bit higher, just the login page, the home page, like those examples were, there was no color, just sort of show where the elements were. And then the prototype itself is like the actual, how the actual product behaves. So that is like a formal, like the final look of the product. Maybe I can find a good example here. Actually, here's a better example. I'm just gonna post it in the right, the left of the of our of that previous image, or sorry, to the right of the previous image. So here's actually the difference. So just want to correct myself. So wireframe is a very simple, example. There's no, I think even what I did might have been considered a prototype, but the wireframe is super simple. There's no details. They don't even have logo, you know. The prototype, I would imagine the prototype is when they will use design tools and they will actually formally make things with the right margins and so on, it seems. But still, there's no actual information. Yeah. And then the mock-up is like the actual what you want your app to look like. So it's this gradual process of, yeah, it seems to be this process of increasing the fidelity of the app from low to high.
Okay, thank you. And then prototype, like I know there's no like real functionality to it, but is it like it still shows you what happens if like you click from one button to the next or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's exactly, yeah. It just
And
shows like each, I guess you'll have different screens to show what each would look like or different these drawings.
okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So the tools, so that example, the principles of good design. So my friend used Figma to make that. Now you don't need to use Figma. There are a lot of like easier tools you can use for wireframing and designing. And yeah, wireframing, as you can see, it looks like the first one on the left. I mean, you could even make that in Google Slides, but that could be made in Figma. And then the one on the right is just by hand, a drawing. So yeah. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to export this and then close the whiteboard. And we'll put the whiteboard up just so everyone can see that. So I'm just gonna export a PDF. Okay. All right, let's close the whiteboard and let me share my screen because we will be starting on labs very shortly. Oh, wait, I'm just sharing my desktop. Let's see, where were we? Here. All righty, so on to our lab. So for our lab, what we're going to do is we're going to get every group visit 10 websites that you use often and make a list of common design elements. So what are the pros and cons of the design? Kind of like how I went on Netflix. You can choose Netflix and you can choose different websites and sort of do the same thing. We're also going to get you to think about a hobby app. So what's something that you enjoy doing and then write a description of a website related to that hobby. And then think about what elements and features would it need. You know, a good way to think about that would be user stories, in the same sort of descriptions of, you know, based on that hobby app and the website that you've thought of. What are some features that you want? Like, you know, I want a button that can let me do this, or as a, you know, as a visitor, I want, you know, X and Y. And then for submissions on Canvas, we want a list of pros and cons of common design elements. So that was the first bit from visiting the website, and then also a written description of the features of your hobby app. All right, so that is if anyone has any questions, just feel free to, you can either like directly, you can just ask in chat and or unmute yourself and ask a question. This will be writing, yeah. Just writing is fine. Yeah, no need to take snapshots.
When you say written description, like just describing like what the website is or like what it's for.
Exactly, yeah. So it's like, I think we sort of did one, like maybe I want a video streaming site that's my hobby, maybe like watching YouTube. I want to make my own video streaming site, you know, maybe a little bit of a description about that website. And then, you know, thinking about all the user features and the elements and features it would need. And I guess a good way to organize that would be first have user features in that sort of, and I can even post an example in the chat. But first have user features, you know, as this type of user, when I do this, some action on the website, you know, this happens. This is the outcome. And then based on all those user features, then it's very easy to figure out, you know, what elements are needed. That's one way it could be done. You could do windows with design. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Yeah, it can be a recipe app, like cooking something. Yeah, you don't need to do what I just did, but like everything you need to do is just here. So, you know, 10 websites that you often use, visit them and just make a list of design elements. Like you can just type this out, you know, what are pros and cons? I did some of it in the demo, but you don't need to like make a design, is what I'm trying to say. You just have to write down some things. And then yeah, the hobby app, pretty straightforward. Think about what hobby you have, what sort of website will you make for that hobby, you know, like a recipe app, and then list out some of the user features, you know, in that format would probably be really helpful. And then based on that, you can think about, you know, what elements can support these user features. And then those two things are being submitted. Okay. Anyone have any other questions? GPT?
I had a question.
For sure. How can I help?
So basically, like for the submission part of the assignment, do we have to basically submit like 10 pros and cons like for each website, or like how many pros and cons do we need to submit?
So you need to visit 10 websites, but as far as pros and cons go, I think, you know, maybe 3 minimum pros and just, you know, as many as you can think of.
So
It's more
basically,
of an
it's like
exercise.
when you're visiting these websites, you're noticing common design elements, and then you're designing the pros and cons around them. Is that the
Exactly, yeah. So just think about like, just like when I mentioned when I went to Netflix, one thing I noticed was I really like that the background image is their actual app, what it looks like. And then I also like that it's more of like a dark theme, so it's not too, it doesn't hurt my eyes, right? And then another thing was that I like how you know, that section where you have to type in your email address. I like that it's a transparent button. And then I
okay?
like also that when I click that, the email address text shrunk and moved to the top left inside that button or that input container. It was not a button, it was an input container. I liked that it did that. And then I like that the get started button was huge and right next to it. So just stuff like that.
What about like cons? Like what would be examples of cons? Like you said, you can write like the language, it's not transparent, and like you can nitpick the website.
Exactly, yeah. So that was, I mean, obviously it depends on the website. And one thing I didn't like was that in the case of Netflix, it was that it might have just been specific to my browser, the settings, but that's fine. Like one thing I didn't like was the drop down for language was not transparent, and it should have like maybe it should have it dropped down like halfway on top of that the drop down button. It didn't. There was no like white space between the drop down button and then the actual drop down.
Yeah, okay,
And of
makes
course,
sense.
it wasn't transparent. So it'll be individual. Like people will have different cons because we all have like our different ideas of what looks nice design wise. But yeah,
Yeah, okay,
so
thank you. Makes sense.
10 websites, so 5 sites max. Yeah, I can just double check. Can you give a few examples? For sure. Let me think about buttons, logos for sure. So some example of elements. Yeah, I'll actually type this in the chat. So we have some examples. We have buttons, logo, like logo image. We have input fields. Like those are the things that you write in. But even those, like I think just those three, it's huge because many things are buttons. Like even that language option, that drop down was you can just call that a button. A button is anything that you interact with and you just click and it does something. So like a nav bar, I mean, yes, it's a nav bar, but it's also a series of buttons that are just arranged in a certain way. But it's made in a way so that like you don't see the outline of the button. You just see it's just a clickable text. Nav bar, header, footer, hero, like these are all examples. Sure, yeah, links can also be considered design elements. Absolutely. For sure. Yeah. So I hope if anyone has any more questions, let me know. But I hope those are, those examples, those 7 or so like that, those should be sufficient in terms of thinking about it. You also don't need to be super, super specific. As long as you explain yourself, like what's nice on the website, I think that should be fine. Yeah. You don't need to like specifically find the best term to describe what that is. All right, so I'm gonna get the lab started. Start breakout rooms. So let's see, let us start breakout rooms. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, just feel free to raise your hands, and we'll get to you as soon as we can.